I found 25 things Navy Federal won't tell you when you open your account. No more guessing what's possible, no more wondering what they'll approve. You know the system better than most bank employees who clock in every day. So in a minute, you'll know how to pull $10,000 in cash straight from your Navy Federal credit card without triggering cash advance fees. You'll see how to block hard pulls when you go for a credit limit increase, a second application, or when checking your internal score. And I'll show you how to change one sneaky account setting that could be the real reason that you're not getting that max $8,000 limit increase. Let's start with how to liquidate your credit cards for free. This is something Navy Federal definitely isn't advertising on their homepage, but it can be a real game changer if you ever need a bunch of cash all at once. So what if you have a Navy Federal credit card with a great limit? It's great, but you're in a situation where you need actual cash, not credit. Maybe it's a down payment, a rent check, or you just need liquid cash in your hand for something that credit cards just can't cover. You pull up the app, tap around, and there's no clear way to pull that money out without triggering a cash advance fee, not to mention the sky high interest rates that start adding up immediately. Now, this is where you can use the Navy Federal Go prepaid card. This prepaid card acts just like a debit card at the ATM, but there's one thing that's different. You can fund it using your Navy Federal credit card, and the transaction shows up as purchase, not as a cash advance. That means no cash advance fees, no 30% APR horror stories, and no instant interest. You're using your credit card limit, but in a way that's essentially like pulling money out of your own bank account. But the thing is, it has to be a Navy Federal issued credit card under your name. So no funny business with outside banks or friends cards. Now, with this hack, you can withdraw up to $600 per day with an ATM using one of your prepaid cards. Now, imagine you add up to 5 cards. Yes, you're allowed to do that. And suddenly you've got access to $3,000 a day in cash. If you keep it going for a few days, that's $10,000 plus dollars in liquid cash, all pulled from your Navy Federal credit line without ever triggering a cash advance fee. And listen, timing is everything here. So if you're going to run this play, here's the smart way to do it. Wait until the day after your statement closes, then fund your prepaid card. That timing locks in your charge into a fresh new billing cycle. So you get the entire cycle plus the full grace period, often up to 55 days, to pay it back without a single cent of interest. It's one of the cleanest ways to tap your credit card for cash without waving red flags or getting hit with those cash advance fees like I've been talking about. Now, another thing Navy Federal won't tell you is that auto credit limit increases might be hurting you. So you're probably doing all the things right, keeping your utilization low, making every payment on time, using your card consistently, and now you're closing in on that 181-day mark with Navy Federal. And if you don't know, Navy Federal has an internal rule that makes you wait at least 181 days between manual credit limit increase requests. It's like a built-in cooldown period, and hitting that mark gives you your best shot at a big bump in credit limit. Now, let's say you got your eye on the prize. An $8,000 manual increase, the max Navy Federal typically offers. You've done the work, you're ready to pull the trigger, but then out of nowhere, you log in and see they've already given you an auto credit limit increase of $1,500. Now, at first you think, hey, free money, I'll take it. But the problem is that gift just reset your 181-day clock. Now you've got to wait another 6 months before you can even ask for that manual increase again. And here's the real kicker. That $1,500 bump barely makes a dent in your credit utilization. But if you score that $8,000 increase you were aiming for, the whole time, you could have dropped your utilization enough to see a significant jump in your FICO score. Now, this matters because when you go to apply for a new credit card, business lines of credit, or even high limit funding offers, other lenders are watching those. They don't just look at your score, they look at how much other banks trust you. If Navy Federal has you sitting at $30,000, Chase might think, okay, let's match that. But if your limits are capped low, other banks will play it safe too. So here's a solution to that. You can call Navy Federal and then opt out of auto credit limit increases altogether. So just call in and say, I'd like to turn off auto credit line increases on my account. That way you control the timing and you can go for the max limit when you're ready, not when they decide to give it to you. And if you want me to keep dropping more Navy Federal inside plays, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. It's honestly the best way to let me know this is the kind of content that you want more of. And let's move on to credit line reallocation. This one's for the folks who feel like, they're drowning in high interest debt. Staring at balances just won't move no matter how hard they're trying to pay things down. Most people don't know this, but After you've had a Navy Federal credit card open for at least 1 year, you can actually move credit limits from one card to another. And here's a real world example. A Navy Federal member shared, I told them I wanted to close that card. I put $10,000 on my flagship and the other 10,000 on my platinum. Now I have a $50,000 platinum and a $30,000 flagship. So the result is you end up with two cards featuring significantly higher limits. And if either of those cards have 0% APR intro balance transfer offers, that extra limit instantly gives you a massive, breathing room on that card to pull a big financial move. You could consolidate high interest credit card debt. You could transfer balances to that 0% APR card and stop the bleeding of thousands of dollars every year in interest. Now, this move isn't for everyone, but if you're carrying high interest balances or prepping for a funding play, it's really a next level strategy most people never even think to ask for. Now, let's talk about your secret internal scores. Now, Navy Federal will rarely tell you this, but you're being judged by more than just your credit score and report. They actually have their own internal scoring system that ranges from 100 to 450. Now, your internal score is like your relationship report card with Navy Federal, and it can carry just as much or even more weight than your actual credit score when it comes to getting approved. It sits next to your TransUnion FICO 9 score, and it reflects how much trust Navy Federal has in you based on your history with them. And here's an example. Another Navy Federal member shared this data point. They were approved for a $20,000 Navy Federal credit card with a low 600s credit score roughly 2 years after bankruptcy. They didn't just apply cold, they built up that relationship first, opened a secured card, then later graduated to an unsecured card, took out pledge loans, and then paid them on time. And then they used the late night approval hack to apply during that late night window that a lot of people are talking about. So again, Navy Federal doesn't only look at your FICO scores, they also weigh out your internal score and overall relationship. Things like on-time payments, account mix, and account age with Navy Federal. So in this case, the member proved strong, consistent behavior with Navy Fed. So even with a rough credit file, they still walked away with a high limit approval. But there are ways that you can boost your internal score. So here's the good news. You can actually build out that internal score intentionally. So this isn't just some mystery algorithm you have no control over. It's really based on your behavior with them. So here's where I would start. You can use your Navy Federal products like the pledge loans, certificates, checking, savings accounts. And then you want to deposit and move funds regularly, show them that you're active. And then you want to stick around. Time really matters. Long-term members get rewarded. Also, avoid any late payments or return transactions at all costs. Even if your FICO score is in the 500s, a strong internal score can open doors you thought were closed. And there's actually a way that you can check your internal score reliably. So when you apply for a credit product with Navy Federal, either a card, a loan, a line of credit, your internal score is often appearing on that approval or denial letter. But if you're not ready to risk a hard inquiry, you want to try this play. First, freeze your credit reports. That means Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, and then apply for a Navy Federal credit card. And then next, when you get denied, since they can't access your credit report, wait for the denial letter and your internal score will likely be printed on it. I know it's sneaky, well, probably sneaky, but it's effective. Now, another thing Navy Federal won't tell you about is the late night hack. Now, if you hung around Navy Federal circles for a while, you've probably heard people talk about this late night hack thing. So here's how it supposedly works. You apply between 11 p.m. and 4:30 a.m. Eastern Time. During those hours, manual underwriters, the humans, are off the clock. The automated system is left in charge and is said to be a little bit more generous. Now, does this actually work? That's where the community is split. Some folks swear by it, showing, off late night approvals and big limit wins when earlier attempts failed. And then others are saying it's totally hype, that your approval has way more to do with your internal score and history with Navy Federal than what time you apply. Now, the truth is, Navy Federal's never confirmed it, and results are kind of all over the place. But if your profile is strong, timing probably won't matter much. But if you're borderline and looking for any possible edge, it's a low effort move to test out for yourself. Now, like a lot of banks and lenders, Navy Federal isn't going to be, forthcoming with what credit bureau they pull from for each product. And this part trips a lot of people up. And honestly, I get why. Your bank can decide to pull from a different credit bureau for all kinds of reasons. Navy Federal is no different. It's not random, at least not entirely, but from the outside, it can feel random. And that because they can pull a different bureau based on the product you're applying for. It could be the type of review they're doing. It could even be tied to where you live, what's on your file or what other recent pulls they see. And sometimes it's just their internal system routing things differently on that particular day. But after digging through a ton of real world data points from Navy Federal members, here's the pattern most people are seeing right now for which bureau gets pulled. So for personal credit cards, it's almost always TransUnion FICO 9. For business products, it's going to be Experian. For credit limit increases, it's often Equifax FICO 9. Now, I really like this extra tip, and it is to freeze the bureaus that you don't want pulled. Now, it's not 100% guaranteed, but it can kind of steer them toward the one that you prefer. Next, you might want to completely avoid hard inquiries altogether. Now, hard inquiries aren't the end of the world to me, but most of us still hate them. They can ding your score a few points and, hang around for 2 years max. So if you can skip one, why wouldn't you? So here's the play. If you want no hard inquiries, then you got to request your credit limit increases through the app. This is kind of the sweet spot. It's usually a soft pull, which means your score stays untouched. Now, if you decide to pick up the phone and call in, you might feel better talking to a rep, but this route often triggers a hard credit pull, and that hit could have been completely avoided. Now, don't forget, if you do get denied, don't take it personally. You might be able to reuse that same hard pull for up to 30 days if you try again. Now, this can come in clutch if you just paid down a big balance or your score just popped up, a few points since the denial. Now, moving on, here's a few quick hit rules that give you an edge that Navy Federal won't tell you about. And this is for people that want to move like a Navy Federal insider. And these are the rules that separate the casual members from the ones who squeeze every last advantage out of the relationship. These are really the things that once you hear them, make you go, wait, how did no one tell me about this sooner? First is you can only hold 3 personal Navy Federal credit cards at a time. But here's the thing, you can double up on the same card. So if you love the cash rewards card, there's nothing stopping you from running 2 of them side by side. Next, starting limits without income verification caps at around $25,000. That's really the ceiling for your very first approval unless you're willing to show proof of income. So if you want to step into the big boy limit club, be ready to back it up with documentation. And then max limits are clear, but the total cap trips people up. So the flagship can go as high as $80,000, and then all other personal cards can top out at about $50,000. But the total combined limit across all your Navy Federal personal cards can't exceed $80,000. So if you hit the top limit on one card, that's going to leave no headroom for the others. And this information is just scratching the surface. There's actually 5 things that you must do right now with Navy Federal if you want to get approved for their credit cards. In fact, I even show you how people are getting approved with bad credit right now. Yeah, low FICO scores. So just hit the next video right here and I'll break down everything for you. Thank you for watching.